The galaxy has always been shaped by those who dared to embrace what others feared. While the Jedi walked paths of serenity and restraint, another order rose from the shadows, built upon principles that would make even the bravest souls hesitate. The Sith did not stumble into darkness. They ran toward it with open arms, transforming what the Jedi called corruption into a philosophy of liberation, power, and ultimate freedom. To understand the Sith is to peer into the abyss of the Force itself and recognize that darkness is not merely the absence of light. Darkness is its own entity, with its own wisdom, its own strength, and its own terrible beauty. The Sith philosophy is not simply about evil for evil's sake. It represents a fundamental rejection of limitations, a refusal to deny the most primal aspects of sentient existence, and a belief that true power comes not from suppressing one's nature, but from embracing it completely. For thousands of years, the Sith have walked a path that most would consider forbidden. Their philosophy has been written in blood across countless worlds, carved into ancient stones on Korriban, whispered in the halls of forgotten temples, and preserved in holocrons that glow with an ominous crimson light. Every word of their code, every teaching passed from master to apprentice, every ritual performed in the name of the dark side carries with it a weight that has shaped galactic history again and again. The story of Sith philosophy begins not with monsters, but with Jedi who dared to ask forbidden questions. Around 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, members of the Jedi Order grew frustrated with the restrictions placed upon them. They saw the Jedi Code not as wisdom, but as chains that prevented them from reaching their true potential. These rebellious Force users believed that the Jedi had become so focused on maintaining peace that they had forgotten what it meant to truly live. They craved knowledge that had been locked away, power that had been deemed too dangerous, and understanding that came only through embracing every aspect of the Force, including its darkest corners. This philosophical divide erupted into open warfare during what historians call the 100-Year Darkness, a century of bloodshed that would reshape the galaxy forever. When these dark Jedi were finally defeated and exiled from Republic space, they wandered until they discovered the planet Korriban and its native inhabitants, the Sith fittest. What followed was not merely conquest, but a fusion of philosophies. The exiled dark Jedi brought their understanding of the Force, and the Sith species contributed their own ancient traditions of dark side manipulation. From this union arose something entirely new: the Sith Order, with a philosophy that would endure for millennia. The path we walk tonight will take us deep into the heart of Sith thinking. We will explore their code line by line, examining what each precept truly means and why it resonated with so many throughout galactic history. We will understand why the Sith rejected peace, how they transformed emotions into weapons, and what it truly means to seek freedom through power. This is not a journey for the faint of heart, but for those brave enough to understand that the galaxy's darkest philosophy contains truths that shaped civilizations, toppled governments, and nearly extinguished the light forever. The Sith Code: peace is a lie, At the very foundation of Sith philosophy lies their code, a mantra that serves as both teaching and creed. Unlike the Jedi Code, with its emphasis on harmony and selflessness, the Sith Code begins with a declaration that challenges everything the Jedi hold sacred. 6 lines that have led countless souls toward the dark side. 6 lines that encapsulate thousands of years of accumulated wisdom and terrible knowledge. Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. These words were not written lightly. The architect of this version of the code was Sorza Sin, one of the original Dark Jedi exiles who helped found the Sith Order. Sin had witnessed firsthand how the Jedi's obsession with peace had created what she saw as weakness and stagnation. She believed that the Jedi's teachings were designed to suppress the very aspects of sentient existence that made life worth living. In her view, the Jedi were not guardians of peace, but jailers of potential, and their code was nothing more than a cage dressed up as enlightenment. The code was created through the Sith language itself, where it was known as the Kotsi Sajak. This ancient tongue carried power in its very syllables, and to speak the code in its original form was said to resonate with the dark side of the Force. The code would be recited by Sith throughout the ages, passed down from master to apprentice, carved into the walls of temples on Korriban and Ziost, and preserved in holocrons that would outlast empires. It has been spoken by Dark Lords in moments of triumph and by dying apprentices with their last breath. It has justified conquest and genocide, inspired revolutions, and guided the creation of some of the most terrible weapons the galaxy has ever known. When David Gator wrote the modern version of the Sith Code for the video game Knights of the Old Republic, he did so by inverting the Jedi Code and drawing inspiration from some of humanity's darkest historical philosophies. He later admitted that aspects of the accompanying Sith dialogue were partly inspired by Mein Kampf, the manifesto that justified some of history's greatest atrocities. This connection is not meant to glorify such philosophies, but to understand that the Sith Code represents an ideology that prizes power over compassion, strength over cooperation, and individual supremacy over collective good. The Code begins with its most controversial declaration: peace is a lie. This single statement rejects the foundational belief of the Jedi Order. To the Jedi, peace is the ultimate goal, a state to be achieved through balance and harmony. But the Sith saw this as delusion. They argued that peace was merely a temporary absence of conflict, not a natural state of existence. Throughout the galaxy, species competed for resources, individuals struggled for survival, and entire civilizations rose and fell in endless cycles of conflict and renewal. The Sith believed that the Jedi's insistence on peace was an attempt to deny reality itself, to pretend that the fundamental nature of existence could be suppressed through meditation and discipline. To declare peace a lie is to acknowledge that conflict is the natural state of the universe. Stars are born in violent collisions of gas and dust. Life evolves through competition and adaptation. Civilizations advance through struggle and innovation driven by need. Even the Force itself is in constant motion, light and dark in eternal opposition. The Sith looked at this reality and embraced it. They did not see conflict as something to be avoided, but as something to be understood and wielded. War, competition, and struggle were not aberrations to be corrected, but fundamental forces that drove evolution and progress. This rejection of peace also carried a deeply personal dimension. The Sith believed that internal peace, the kind of serenity the Jedi sought through meditation, was a form of death. To be at peace was to be complacent, to stop growing, to accept one's limitations. True life, in the Sith view, was found in constant striving, in the tension between what one is and what one could become. A Sith who found peace had ceased to be Sith, for they had stopped their journey toward greater power and understanding. The philosophical implications of rejecting peace as a lie extend far beyond mere justification for warfare. It represents a fundamentally different view of existence itself. The Jedi saw the Force as something to be served, a cosmic energy that flowed through all things and required balance. The Sith saw the Force as something to be mastered, a tool to be wielded by those strong enough to claim it. By declaring peace a lie, the Sith were not simply saying that conflict exists. They were saying that conflict is the truth of existence, and anyone who denied this truth was living in delusion. This perspective made the Sith dangerous, not merely because they embraced violence, but because they believed violence and conflict were honest expressions of the universe's true nature. When a Sith Lord commanded armies to conquer worlds, they did not see themselves as villains disrupting peace. They saw themselves as realists, acknowledging and participating in the fundamental truth of existence. They were not breaking peace. They were exposing it for the illusion it always was. Through passion, the foundation of Sith power. From the rejection of peace flows the second line of the Sith Code: there is only passion. If peace is a lie, then what truth takes its place? For the Sith, that truth is passion in all its forms. This is where Sith philosophy begins to reveal its seductive nature, for passion is something every sentient being understands. Love, hatred, anger, fear, desire, ambition. These are the emotions that make beings feel alive. The Jedi taught suppression of these emotions, viewing them as paths to corruption. The Sith taught embrace, viewing them as sources of unimaginable strength. The concept of passion in Sith philosophy extends far beyond simple emotional expression. It represents a fundamental approach to experiencing existence itself. Where the Jedi sought to observe the Force from a place of calm detachment, the Sith believed that true understanding came from total immersion. Passion was not merely feeling emotions, it was. Consider what passion means to a Sith. It is the burning hatred that fuels endless training, pushing the body beyond its limits until muscles tear and bones crack, because the desire for revenge against one's enemies outweighs any pain. It is the consuming ambition that drives a Sith apprentice to study forbidden texts for days without sleep, risking madness to unlock secrets that could elevate them above their master. It is the fierce love that makes a Sith Lord slaughter entire populations to protect what they hold dear, viewing mercy as betrayal of their deepest convictions. The Sith philosophy of passion stands in direct opposition to the Jedi teaching that there is no emotion, there is peace. The Jedi believed that emotions, particularly strong emotions, clouded judgment and led to rash decisions. They taught their students to acknowledge emotions, but not to act upon them, to let feelings pass like clouds across a clear sky. This approach aimed to create wise, balanced individuals who could make decisions based on logic and the greater good rather than personal desires. The Sith viewed this teaching as fundamentally wrong. They argued that emotions were not obstacles to clear thinking, but enhancements to it. A Sith fueled by righteous anger could accomplish feats of strength impossible for a calm Jedi. A Sith driven by ambition would seek out knowledge and power that a content Jedi would never pursue. Fear, which the Jedi viewed as the beginning of the path to the dark side, could sharpen the senses and provide the desperation needed to survive impossible situations. Even negative emotions like jealousy and hatred had their uses, providing motivation and focus that could be channeled toward productive ends. Darth Plagueis, one of the most powerful Sith Lords who ever lived, explained this philosophy to his apprentice Darth Sidious. Remember why the Sith are more powerful than the Jedi, Sidious? Because we are not afraid to feel. We embrace the spectrum of emotions, from the heights of transcendent joy to the depths of hatred and despair. This was not an endorsement of uncontrolled emotional outbursts. Rather, it was an acknowledgement that emotions, when properly understood and harnessed, provided a direct conduit to the dark side of the Force. The practice of channeling passion into power required significant discipline, perhaps even more than the Jedi's approach of suppression. A Sith had to learn to ride the wave of their emotions without being drowned by them. They had to maintain enough self-awareness to direct their passion toward specific goals, rather than letting it scatter their focus. This was why not every angry or hateful being became a powerful Sith. True Sith mastery required taking the raw energy of emotion and forging it into a weapon as precise as any lightsaber. Historical examples throughout Sith history demonstrate the power of passion channeled properly. When Darth Bane sought to destroy the Brotherhood of Darkness and remake the Sith Order, his passion was not blind rage, but a carefully nurtured conviction that he was right and all others were wrong. This conviction drove him to study ancient Sith teachings that others deemed too dangerous or difficult. It gave him the strength to stand alone against an entire Sith army. His passion for the purity of Sith philosophy was so intense that it sustained him through trials that would have broken lesser beings. Similarly, when Exar Kun delved into Sith sorcery thousands of years earlier, his passion for knowledge and power drove him to explore techniques that had been forbidden even among the Sith themselves. His burning desire to understand the deepest secrets of the dark side led him to Yavin 4, where he performed alchemical experiments that created monsters and unlocked powers that previous Sith Lords had only theorized about. His passion did not make him reckless. It made him relentless. Every setback fueled his determination. Every discovery intensified his hunger for more. The Sith understanding of passion also included what they called dark passions, emotions that civilized societies typically viewed as destructive or immoral. Hatred, for instance, was not merely acceptable to the Sith, it was often celebrated as one of the purest forms of passion. A Sith's hatred could be directed at enemies, at perceived injustices, or even at themselves for their weaknesses. This hatred became a furnace in which Sith lords forged themselves into something harder and more dangerous. Fear, too, had its place in Sith philosophy, though in a complex way. The Sith did not value being afraid, but they valued the power that came from making others fear. Master Yoda warned Luke Skywalker that fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. The Sith would agree with this sequence, but where Yoda meant it as a warning, the Sith saw it as a roadmap. Start with fear, transform it into anger, cultivate that anger into hate, and use that hate to inflict suffering upon your enemies. Each step in this progression was a refinement of passion, a distillation of raw emotion into increasingly potent fuel for the dark side. The concept of passion in Sith philosophy also explains their approach to attachment. The Jedi forbade attachments, believing they led to selfishness and clouded judgment. A Jedi was not supposed to form romantic relationships, maintain close family ties, or even feel excessive loyalty to specific individuals over the collective order. The Sith embraced attachments, but in their own twisted way. A Sith's attachments were possessive and consuming. They did not love, they coveted. They did not befriend, they owned. These intense attachments fueled their passion and gave them something worth fighting for, even if that fighting meant destroying everything else in the galaxy. Anakin Skywalker's fall to the dark side perfectly illustrates this aspect of Sith philosophy. His attachments to Padme and his mother were not wrong in themselves, but the intensity and possessiveness of those attachments, combined with his fear of loss, created exactly the kind of passion the Sith could exploit. Darth Sidious did not need to create Anakin's passion. He merely needed to redirect it, to show Anakin that the dark side offered a way to protect what he loved through sheer force of will and power. The tragedy was that this passion, meant to save, ultimately destroyed. The Sith teaching of "there's only passion" also implied the rejection of apathy and complacency. A being without passion was, in Sith philosophy, already dead in all the ways that mattered. This made the Sith fundamentally dynamic. They could not rest on their achievements. Each accomplishment only intensified their hunger for the next. Each conquered world only made them crave the next conquest. This constant striving, this inability to be satisfied, was both the Sith's greatest strength and their ultimate weakness. But to the Sith themselves, it was simply the cost of truly being alive. Through passion, I gained strength. The third line of the Sith Code builds upon the foundation of passion. Through passion, I gained strength. This progression is crucial to understanding Sith philosophy. It is not enough merely to feel strongly. Those feelings must be transformed into tangible power. This is where the Sith philosophy moved from emotional theory into practical application. Passion alone could consume and destroy, but passion properly channeled became strength. The concept of strength in Sith philosophy was multifaceted, encompassing physical prowess, mental fortitude, force abilities, and force of will. When a Sith Lord drew upon their passion to fuel their connection to the dark side, they accessed power that the calm serenity of a Jedi could never reach. This was not merely philosophical rhetoric. The dark side demonstrably granted abilities that the light side did not readily provide. Force lightning, the ability to drain life from others, sorceries that could reshape flesh and warp minds. These techniques required the kind of raw emotional power that only passion could provide. Physical strength was perhaps the most obvious manifestation of this principle. Sith Lords were known throughout history for their extraordinary combat abilities. Tulak Hord, one of the greatest Sith warriors, could defeat multiple opponents simultaneously through a combination of lightsaber mastery and force-enhanced reflexes that bordered on precognition. His strength came not from calm meditation, but from the fury of battle, the joy of combat, and the hunger for victory. Each strike of his lightsaber was fueled by emotions that a Jedi would have suppressed, and this gave him an edge that few could match. The legendary Darth Malgus, who lived during the Great Galactic War, exemplified this transformation of passion into physical strength. Witnesses reported that Malgus fought with a terrible beauty, his every movement fueled by a controlled rage that made him seem almost supernatural. He did not tire in battle because his hatred sustained him beyond the point where his body should have collapsed. He did not hesitate because his convictions burned away all doubt. His strength was not merely muscular or technical. It was the strength of absolute certainty backed by passion so intense it could be felt by those around him like heat from a fire. Mental strength was equally important in Sith philosophy. The dark side demanded much from those who wielded it, and weak minds broke under the strain. Passion had to be intense enough to fuel power, but controlled enough not to lead to madness. This balance required extraordinary mental discipline. The Sith did not suppress their emotions as the Jedi did, but neither did they allow themselves to be swept away by them. They rode their emotions like a rider controls a powerful beast, guiding it, directing it, but allowing it its nature rather than trying to tame it into something it was not. This mental strength manifested in various ways. Sith Lords developed iron wills that could dominate others through sheer force of personality. They could resist mental attacks that would shatter ordinary minds. They could endure physical torture that would drive most beings mad, their hatred and anger sustaining them through any ordeal. The Sith Inquisitors of the old Sith Empire were trained to withstand interrogation methods that included both physical torment. The connection between passion and force strength was perhaps the most profound aspect of this line of the code. The Force responded to emotion. The Jedi harnessed it through calm and focus, creating a steady, reliable flow of power. The Sith harnessed it through passion, creating surges of power that could accomplish feats beyond Jedi capability. When Darth Sidious unleashed his Force lightning, It was not merely a technique he had learned, it was his hatred made manifest, his rage given physical form. The more intense his emotions, the more devastating his power. This understanding of the relationship between passion and strength led the Sith to actively cultivate their emotions. They would meditate not to achieve peace, but to kindle their anger. They would revisit past grievances to keep their hatred fresh. They would nurture their ambitions until they consumed all other thoughts. These practices would seem pathological to the Jedi, but to the Sith, they were necessary training. Just as a Jedi would practice lightsaber forms, a Sith would practice emotional intensity. The training regimens at Sith academies reflected this philosophy. Students were not merely taught force techniques and combat skills. They were subjected to trials designed to evoke intense emotional responses. They were pitted against each other in competitions where failure meant death or humiliation. They were given impossible tasks and punished harshly when they failed. All of this was intended to forge passion into strength, to ensure that only those who could transform emotion into power would survive to become true Sith. Darth Bane's training under the Brotherhood of Darkness illustrated this principle. When Bane struggled to tap into the dark side, his instructors did not offer gentle guidance. They pushed him until he snapped, until his frustration and anger burst forth with such intensity that it shattered the mental blocks, preventing him from accessing his full power. This breakthrough came not despite his emotions, but because of them. His passion, once properly channeled, gave him strength that made him one of the most powerful Sith in history. The concept of strength through passion also explained why the Sith were often able to accomplish short-term victories against the numerically superior Jedi. A single Sith Lord, properly motivated and fully embracing their passion, could equal or exceed the power of multiple Jedi. During the various Jedi-Sith wars throughout history, there were numerous accounts of individual Sith Lords holding off entire teams of Jedi Knights through sheer force of will, backed by a dark passion. The Jedi's calm strength was reliable and steady, but it lacked the peaks of power that Sith passion could reach. However, this approach to strength carried inherent dangers that even the Sith acknowledged. Passion could strengthen, but it could also consume. Some Sith became so focused on cultivating their anger that they lost the ability to function without it. Others let their hatred grow so intense that it destroyed their capacity for strategic thinking. The history of the Sith was littered with Dark Lords who became so consumed by their passion that they made catastrophic strategic errors or alienated potential allies through needless cruelty. The line, "Through passion I gained strength," also implied a perpetual state of growth. Because passion was continuous and ever-renewing, strength should be too. A Sith who rested on past accomplishments was violating this principle. Every day should see a Sith growing stronger, pushing their limits, discovering new depths to their passion and new heights to their power. This created the characteristic restlessness of the Sith, their inability to be satisfied with any level of achievement. This endless growth through passion also meant that Sith strength was not static. It fluctuated with emotional state. A Sith dealing with personal tragedy might find their power intensified by grief and rage. A Sith celebrating a victory might experience a temporary surge of power from their exaltation. This variability made the Sith unpredictable and dangerous, but it also created vulnerabilities. A Sith whose passion had been dampened through depression or satisfaction might find their strength diminished at a critical moment. The relationship between passion and strength in Sith philosophy also extended to how Sith lords interacted with each other. The power dynamics between master and apprentice, between rival Sith lords, between the dominant and the subordinate, were all fundamentally about strength derived from passion. A master's authority rested not on tradition or hierarchy, but on their demonstrated ability to channel passion into power more effectively than their apprentice. The moment an apprentice's passion grew strong enough to overcome the master's, the traditional Sith order demanded that succession occur. Through strength, I gain power. The fourth line of the Sith Code represents another crucial progression. Through strength, I gain power. On first reading, strength and power might seem synonymous, but in Sith philosophy, they were distinct concepts. Strength was internal, the personal capacity for force, will, and ability. Power was external, the capacity to effect change in the world, to bend reality to one's will, to make one's desires manifest regardless of opposition. This distinction was vital to understanding why the Sith were not merely strong warriors, but successful conquerors and rulers. Many beings possess strength in various forms. A strong warrior could defeat opponents in combat. A strong force user could perform impressive feats. But strength alone did not guarantee the ability to shape galactic civilization. Power required not just personal ability, but the knowledge and skill to apply that ability strategically, to leverage strength into influence, control, and domination. The transformation of strength into power required an understanding how to affect the world around oneself. A Sith Lord might possess tremendous personal strength in the Force, but without the knowledge of how to use that strength to manipulate others, control resources, and establish dominance, that strength remained largely potential. Power was the actualization of strength, the transformation of personal capacity into real-world results. Political power was perhaps the most obvious form this took. The greatest Sith Lords throughout history understood that true power extended beyond the ability to destroy. Darth Sidious exemplified this understanding perfectly. While he possessed tremendous personal strength in the Force, enough to duel Jedi Masters and unleash devastating lightning, his true power came from his political machinations. As Senator and then Chancellor Palpatine, he wielded the entire apparatus of the Galactic Republic as a weapon against the Jedi. His strength in manipulation and deception allowed him to gain power over an entire galaxy. Sidious's rise demonstrated a key Sith insight. Personal strength, no matter how great, was limited by the physical capabilities of a single being. But power, properly exercised, was limited only by one's ambition and cunning. Through the Clone Wars, Sidious commanded armies numbering in the billions. Through Order 66, he eliminated thousands of Jedi simultaneously. Through the formation of the Empire, he restructured galactic civilization to serve his vision. His personal strength was formidable, but his power was epical. The ancient Sith Empire understood this principle as well. After the exiled Dark Jedi arrived on Korriban, they used their strength in the Force to establish themselves as gods to the native Sith species. But they did not stop at mere displays of power. They systematically built an empire, establishing bureaucracies, creating military hierarchies, and developing systems of governance that allowed them to exercise power far beyond what their personal strength could achieve. The Dark Lords who ruled from Zeost and Korriban commanded fleets and armies, controlled entire economies, and shaped the destinies of billions. Economic power was another manifestation of this principle. Strength might allow a Sith to seize resources through force, but power allowed them to control the systems that created and distributed those resources. Several Sith Lords throughout history recognized that controlling trade routes, industries, and financial institutions provided more enduring power than simple conquest. By controlling the means of production and distribution, a cunning Sith could make entire civilizations dependent on their goodwill, wielding power through economic leverage as effectively as through military might. The power of knowledge represented another form of this transformation. Sith holocrons were repositories of ancient wisdom that increased the power of those who accessed them. A Sith might possess the strength to perform basic Force techniques, but studying the holocrons of ancient Dark Lords could provide knowledge that transformed that basic strength into devastating power. When Darth Bane discovered Darth Revan's holocron, his personal strength did not increase dramatically, but his power did. Because he gained knowledge of the thought bomb and the philosophical insights that would allow him to remake the entire Sith Order. The relationship between strength and power in Sith philosophy also encompassed the notion of followers and subordinates. A Sith with strength might accomplish great things alone, but a Sith with power commanded others who extended their reach exponentially. This was not about friendship or collaboration in the Jedi sense. It was about domination and subordination. A powerful Sith Lord did not need to be everywhere at once because they had agents, apprentices, and minions who enacted their will. Their power lay in their ability to compel obedience and channel the strength of others toward their own goals. The concept of power in Sith philosophy was also closely tied to the absence of limitation. Strength might have limits: physical endurance, mental capacity, the maximum potential of one's connection to the Force. But power, in the Sith view, should be limited only by ambition and opportunity. A Sith's power should grow continuously, expanding through conquest, manipulation, and the accumulation of resources and followers. To stop growing in power was to accept limitation, which violated the fundamental Sith drive toward transcendence. This understanding led to some of the Sith's most ambitious and terrible projects. The Star Forge, discovered by Darth Revan, exemplified the Sith approach to power. It was not enough to have the strength to win battles. True power required the ability to produce unlimited warships, to wage war on an industrial scale that made conventional military strength irrelevant. Similarly, Darth vitiates ritual on Nathema, where he consumed all life on an entire planet to fuel his own existence, represented power divorced from any conventional understanding of strength. He did not become physically stronger, but he gained power over life and death itself, sustaining his consciousness for over 1,000 years. The transformation of strength into power also required strategic thinking. Sith philosophy valued cunning as much as raw force. The strongest Sith was not necessarily the most powerful. A Sith with moderate strength but exceptional strategic ability might outmaneuver and defeat a Sith with greater strength but less tactical intelligence. This was why Sith training included not just force techniques and lightsaber combat, but also studies in strategy, manipulation, political theory, and psychology. The historical conflict between Naga Sato and Ludo Kresh illustrated this principle. Both were powerful Sith lords with considerable strength, but Sato understood how to transform his strength into power more effectively. He manipulated events to make himself appear as the strong wartime leader the Sith needed. He orchestrated false flag operations to justify his ascension. He used cunning and deception to eliminate his rival and seize control of the Sith Empire. His victory came not from superior strength, but from superior understanding of how to convert strength into political power. The line, "Through strength, I gain power," also implied a kind of exchange or transformation. Strength was the currency, and power was what you purchased with it. But like any transaction, the exchange rate mattered. A wise Sith would maximize their power relative to the strength expended. This led to Sith preference for efficiency and leverage. Why use brute force when manipulation could achieve the same goal with less expenditure of personal strength? Why fight an enemy directly when they could be tricked into fighting each other? This principle also explained the Sith interest in various force techniques that multiplied their effective power. Battle meditation, for instance, allowed a single Sith Lord to influence the outcome of massive military engagements by enhancing their own forces and demoralizing their enemies. This technique transformed personal strength in the Force into power over the battlefield, making one being the decisive factor in conflicts involving millions. Naga Sato used this very technique during his invasion of Republic space, creating illusions that multiplied his fleet's apparent size and striking fear into defenders across multiple systems simultaneously. The concept of power in Sith philosophy ultimately represented freedom of action. A being with great strength but little power was still constrained by circumstances, by the actions of others, by systemic forces beyond their control. But a being with true power could act upon the world rather than being acted upon. They could initiate rather than merely respond. They could shape reality to their vision rather than adapting to reality as it was presented to them. This was the promise that drew so many to the dark side, the transformation from being subject to the galaxy's currents to becoming the one who directed those currents. The fifth line of the Sith Code declares, "Through power, I gain victory." This progression completes the practical application of Sith philosophy. Passion becomes strength, strength becomes power, and power achieves victory. But in Sith philosophy, victory meant something more profound than simply winning battles or conflicts. Victory represented the complete realization of one's will, the total subjugation of opposition, and the establishment of dominance so absolute that it could not be questioned or challenged. The concept of victory in Sith thought was not temporary or limited. When a Sith achieved victory, it should be total. Half measures and compromises were antithetical to Sith philosophy. A true victory meant that one's enemies were not merely defeated but destroyed, that opposition was not overcome but eliminated, that obstacles were not circumvented but obliterated. This approach to victory explained much of the Sith reputation for cruelty and ruthlessness. From their perspective, showing mercy to a defeated enemy was not compassion, but failure to achieve complete victory. Military victory was the most straightforward application of this principle. Throughout history, Sith lords led conquests that reshaped galactic civilization. The Great Hyperspace War saw Nagasato's forces attack dozens of Republic worlds simultaneously. The Jedi Civil War saw Darth Revan's armada conquer system after system. The Clone Wars saw Darth Sidious manipulate both sides of a galactic conflict. These were not small-scale skirmishes, but total wars aimed at achieving complete victory over the Jedi and the Republic. But true victory in Sith philosophy extended beyond the battlefield. Political victory meant not just holding office, but completely dominating the political system. When Darth Sidious became emperor, he did not simply take control of existing government structures. He systematically dismantled the Republic, eliminated all checks on his authority, and rebuilt galactic civilization around the principle of absolute imperial power. His victory was so complete that resistance seemed futile. The very institutions that might have opposed him were either destroyed or converted to serve his purposes. Personal victory held equal importance. For a Sith, every challenge was an opportunity for victory or a risk of defeat. Overcoming one's own limitations represented a form of victory as meaningful as conquering worlds. When Darth Bane pushed himself beyond what his body could naturally endure, surviving trials that should have killed him, each survival was a victory over weakness and mortality. When Darth Zana mastered Sith sorceries that other students failed to learn, each mastered technique was a victory over ignorance and limitation. The relationship between power and victory in Sith philosophy was direct and causal. If one had sufficient power and still failed to achieve victory, it meant either that one's power was insufficient or that it was poorly applied. This created a built-in mechanism for Sith self-improvement. Failure demanded analysis and correction. A Sith who was defeated despite possessing power had to increase that power or learn to use it more effectively. There was no acceptance of defeat as sometimes being inevitable or the result of chance. Defeat meant inadequacy, and inadequacy meant one had violated the principles of the Sith Code. Victory in the context of master-apprentice relationships, took on special meaning. The traditional Sith dynamic required that apprentices eventually challenge their masters. This challenge was not merely about succession. It was about achieving ultimate victory over the being who had defined one's existence. To defeat one's master was to prove that student had surpassed teacher, that the apprentice's power had exceeded that of the one who granted it. This victory was both practical, establishing the apprentice as the new master, and symbolic, representing the triumph of the next generation over the previous. Historical examples of this dynamic illustrate its complexity. When Darth Sidious murdered Darth Plagueis in his sleep, some might view this as dishonorable or cowardly, but from the Sith perspective, it was perfect victory. Sidious had learned everything Plagueis could teach, had exceeded his master's power, and had achieved total victory by eliminating any possibility of resistance or comeback. The method mattered less than the result. Plagueis was dead, Sidious lived, and the Sith line continued. Victory was achieved. The pursuit of victory in Sith philosophy also meant that Sith lords were constantly seeking new challenges. A Sith who had achieved all possible victories in their current sphere would naturally expand their ambitions. This expansionist tendency was not merely greed, but adherence to philosophy. If power led to victory, then one should perpetually be achieving new victories by applying one's power to ever greater challenges. To stop seeking victory was to stagnate, which violated the dynamic nature of Sith philosophy. The nature of victory in Sith philosophy also meant that setbacks were not accepted as final. A battle might be lost, but the war continued. A plan might fail, but new plans could be made. The Sith had been nearly exterminated multiple times throughout history, yet they always returned. This resilience came from their understanding that temporary defeats did not negate the principle that power leads to victory. It merely meant that one's power was not yet sufficient, that one's methods needed refinement, that one's will needed to be hardened further. Victory in Sith philosophy also encompassed the defeat of internal opposition. The greatest victory a Sith could achieve was victory over their own weaknesses. Compassion, mercy, doubt, fear of one's own power. These were internal enemies to be conquered as surely as any external foe. When Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader, his first great victory was over his own remaining attachment to the Jedi Code. He had to achieve victory over the person he had been to become the Sith Lord Sidious needed. The concept of victory also related to the Sith view of the Force itself. The Jedi saw the Force as something to serve and harmonize with. The Sith saw it as something to conquer and dominate. Every act of Force manipulation was a small victory, bending reality to one's will through power. The ultimate victory would be complete mastery over the Force itself, using it as nothing more than a tool to achieve one's desires without limitation or resistance. Through victory, my chains are broken. The sixth line of the Sith Code shifts from the practical to the philosophical. Through victory, my chains are broken. This line encapsulates what the Sith believed was the ultimate goal of their philosophy. All the passion, strength, power, and victory were not ends in themselves, but means to achieve freedom. The chains referenced here were not merely physical bonds, but any limitation that prevented a being from achieving their full potential. Understanding what the Sith meant by chains requires understanding their worldview. They believed that sentient existence was naturally constrained by countless limitations: biology, limited physical capability and lifespan. Society imposed laws, customs, and expectations. Morality constrained behavior. Fear of consequences prevented action. The Force itself seemed to have its own will that could oppose individual desires. From the Sith perspective, most beings live their entire lives trapped by these chains, never even attempting to break free. The Jedi Code itself was, in Sith eyes, perhaps the greatest chain of all. Its restrictions against passion, attachment, and personal ambition were designed to create what the Sith saw as willing slaves to a philosophy that denied individual potential. When the Code said, "There is no emotion, there is peace," the Sith heard a command to surrender one's own drives and desires to an abstract ideal. When it said, "There is no ignorance, there is knowledge," they heard a demand to accept Jedi teachings without question. The entire Jedi system was built to chain Force-sensitive beings to a particular vision of how the Force should be used. Physical limitations represented obvious chains to be broken. The human lifespan, for instance, was a chain that bound even the most powerful beings to eventual death. The Sith sought various ways to break this chain, from Darth Andadu's necromantic techniques to Darth Plagueis' attempts to manipulate midichlorians to prevent death. The pursuit of immortality was not mere selfishness, but a philosophical imperative. If death was a chain, then a true Sith should seek to break it. Similarly, the limitations of the physical body were chains to be broken through Sith alchemy and sorcery. Darth Vader's survival, despite injuries that should have killed him, represented victory over the chain of physical frailty. His armored form, while diminishing his raw power, demonstrated that determination and dark side mastery could overcome even catastrophic wounds. The fact that his existence was painful did not matter. He had broken the chain of mortality and continued to serve the dark side. Moral constraints represented another category of chains in Sith philosophy. Most civilized societies operated under moral systems that prohibited certain actions regardless of their utility. Murder, torture, betrayal. These were forbidden not because they didn't work, but because they violated moral principles. The Sith rejected these limitations entirely. This rejection of morality was not nihilism or mere cruelty for its own sake. From the Sith perspective, moral systems were tools used by the weak to restrain the strong. By convincing everyone to abide by moral rules, those who could not achieve power through might could prevent others from using their natural advantages. The Sith saw morality as a con game, and they refused to be its victims. Breaking moral chains meant recognizing that might did make right. that power justified itself, and that the only true crime was weakness. Social and political chains represented systems of control that limited individual power. Governments, laws, hierarchies, not based on merit. These were all chains that prevented capable individuals from achieving their potential. The Sith view of political systems was fundamentally anarchistic in the sense that they recognized no legitimate authority beyond power itself. A ruler who maintained power through tradition, through hereditary succession, or through democratic mandate was illegitimate in Sith eyes. Only a ruler who maintained power through demonstrated strength and capability deserved to rule. This philosophy explained much of Sith political behavior. They did not merely seek to replace one government with another, but to break the chains of existing political systems entirely. Darth Sidious's transformation of the Republic into the Empire was not simply a change of names. It was the breaking of chains that had bound the galaxy for thousands of years, the chains of democratic process, senatorial authority, and juridical review. He replaced a system based on laws and institutions with one based purely on personal power. Emotional chains were perhaps the most subtle category. The Jedi would say that anger and hatred were chains that bound one to destructive patterns. The Sith would counter that fear of one's own emotions was the real chain. Guilt, shame, regret. These were emotional chains that prevented beings from fully embracing their nature and their power. A Sith had to break these chains by accepting and celebrating aspects of themselves that civilization taught them to suppress. Darth Sidious exemplified this perfectly. He felt no guilt about the genocide of the Jedi, no shame about his deceptions, no regret about the millions who died in the Clone Wars. These emotional chains had been broken, allowing him to act with perfect freedom according to his will. From a Sith perspective, this lack of conscience was not a defect but an achievement. He had liberated himself from the emotional chains that would have prevented lesser beings from taking the actions necessary to achieve ultimate power. The concept of broken chains also related to the Force itself. The Jedi taught that Force users should submit to the will of the Force, allowing it to guide their actions. This submission was, to the Sith, the ultimate chain. The Force was not a master to be served, but a tool to be wielded. Breaking this chain meant asserting one's will over the Force rather than accepting the Force's will over oneself. This was why Darth Plagueis' experiments with manipulating midichlorians were so significant. They represented an attempt to break the chains that the Force itself imposed on reality. The phrase, "My chains are broken," used first-person possessive, emphasizing the personal nature of Sith liberation. Each Sith had to identify and break their own chains. What constrained one Sith might not constrain another. For Anakin Skywalker, the greatest chains were his attachments and his fear of loss. For Darth Maul, the chains were abandonment and the need for belonging. For Darth Sidious, the chains were absurdity and the limitations of mortal existence. Each pursued their own liberation through their own victories. However, there was a profound irony built into this line of the code, though the Sith themselves might not acknowledge it. in their pursuit of freedom from all chains. Many Sith became enslaved to the dark side itself. Their passions, meant to liberate, often consumed them. Their pursuit of power became an addiction that could never be satisfied. Their quest for freedom from limitation led them to accept the tyranny of their own desires. Darth Vader, who sought to save those he loved, became chained to a life support system and enslaved to Sidious's will. His chains were broken only to be replaced by others of his own making. The pursuit of broken chains also created a paradox in master-apprentice relationships. A master who successfully taught their apprentice would inevitably create the being who would break free of the chain of apprenticeship by killing them. Every master knew they were forging the weapon of their own destruction. Yet this was not a flaw in Sith philosophy, but its very essence. The chain of apprenticeship should be broken when the apprentice surpassed the master. This ensured that each generation of Sith would be more powerful, more free, more capable than the last. The ultimate expression of broken chains in Sith philosophy was the concept of transcendence. Some Sith lords sought not merely to become more powerful beings, but to transcend the categories of existence entirely. Darth Vitiate's goal of consuming all life in the galaxy would have broken the chain of physical existence, transforming him into something beyond conventional understanding. Darth Sidious's experiments with transfer essence represented attempts to break the chain of mortality completely. These ambitions, however grandiose or terrible, were the logical conclusion of a philosophy built on breaking chains. The Force shall free me. The seventh and final line of the Sith Code provides the ultimate statement of their philosophy. The Force shall free me. After declaring peace a lie, embracing passion, cultivating strength, achieving power, claiming victory, and breaking chains, the Code concludes with this promise of liberation through the Force itself. This line encapsulates the fundamental difference between Sith and Jedi in their relationship with the Force. Where the Jedi saw the Force as something to harmonize with, the Sith saw it as something to harness. Where the Jedi sought to understand the will of the Force, the Sith sought to impose their will upon it. The promise that the Force shall free me represented a compact between Sith and the dark side. I will give myself to you completely, embracing your nature without reservation, and in return, you will grant me the power to break all chains and achieve perfect freedom. This relationship with the Force was transactional, but also transformative. A Sith did not merely use the Force, they became an expression of it. Through total commitment to the dark side, a Sith Lord transcended their limitations and became something more than they were before. The Force flowed through them not as a gentle stream, but as a raging torrent that reshaped everything it touched. This transformation was what truly freed them, elevating them beyond the constraints that bound ordinary beings. The dark side of the Force in Sith philosophy represented ultimate freedom because it had no moral constraints, no limitations, no boundaries. The light side required control, discipline, and submission to ethical principles. The dark side offered power without restriction, growth without limit, and capability without conscience. By giving themselves fully to the dark side, Sith Lords accessed this boundless potential and used it to achieve their liberation. Historical examples illustrate how different Sith Lords interpreted this promise of freedom through the Force. For some, freedom meant the ability to reshape reality according to their vision. Exar Kun used Sith sorcery to create new life forms through alchemy, playing God with the building blocks of existence. His freedom came from breaking the chains of natural law, using the Force to override the normal rules of biology and evolution. For others, freedom meant transcendence of physical form. Darth Andedu sought immortality through necromancy and the preservation of his spirit. Darth Plagueis pursued similar goals through different methods, attempting to use the Force to prevent death entirely. These pursuits represented the ultimate freedom, liberation from the final constraint of mortality. If the Force could free them from death itself, then they would have achieved a form of eternal freedom that even the most powerful Jedi could not match. For still others, freedom meant the power to dominate all opposition. Darth Sidious's freedom came from his absolute authority over the galaxy. No law constrained him, no opposition checked him, no power rivaled him. The Force had freed him from every limitation that might prevent the full expression of his will. He could destroy worlds on a whim, exterminate entire populations, remake civilization according to his design. This was the promise fulfilled, total liberation through absolute power. The phrase, "The Force shall free me," also implied a future-looking orientation. The present might still contain limitations and constraints, but ultimate freedom was promised as the destination of the Sith path. This kept Sith Lords perpetually striving, always pursuing greater connection to the dark side, always seeking new ways to harness its power. Freedom was not a state to be achieved and then maintained, but a horizon that retreated as one approached, always promising more if one would only push further into darkness. This promise of freedom through the Force provided powerful motivation for those who felt constrained by the Jedi way. Anakin Skywalker felt trapped by Jedi restrictions, limited by their rules, held back by their caution. When Palpatine promised that the dark side would free him, that it would give him the power to save those he loved and to become as powerful as he deserved to be, the appeal was overwhelming. The Sith offered liberation, while the Jedi offered only more restrictions. The corruption that visibly marked long-term dark side users illustrated this cost. Eyes turning yellow, skin becoming pale and mottled, features twisting into something less than human. These were the physical manifestations of the dark side's touch. The Force did free its followers from the limitations of conventional existence, but it transformed them in the process. They became something other, something more powerful, but also something less recognizably alive. Darth Sidious's appearance exemplified this transformation. By the time of the Clone Wars, his true face showed the marks of decades of dark side use. His features were twisted, his skin was diseased, his eyes burned with unnatural intensity. He hid this corruption behind the mask of Chancellor Palpatine, but the mask was itself evidence of how the dark side changed those who embraced it. The Force had indeed freed him, but at the cost of his humanity. The phrase, "The Force shall free me" concluded the Sith Code with a promise, but also with a command. The Force would free its followers, but only if they gave themselves to it completely. Half-hearted commitment led nowhere. Those who dabbled in the dark side without fully embracing it would find neither freedom nor power, only destruction. The dark side demanded all or nothing, total commitment or total defeat. This final line also revealed the quasi-religious nature of Sith philosophy. While the Sith rejected most conventional morality and traditional religion, they maintained an almost devotional relationship with the Force itself. They served it by becoming perfect expressions of its nature. They worshipped it by seeking to wield its power without limit. They honored it by breaking every chain that might prevent its fullest expression through them. The promise of freedom through the Force has drawn countless beings to the dark side across the millennia. It appeals to the part of every sentient being that chafes at limitation, that resents constraint, that dreams of a life without boundaries. The Sith Code offers a path to that freedom, a philosophy that justifies the pursuit of power and a promise that ultimate liberation awaits those brave enough to embrace the darkness completely. Yet we must ask, is this freedom genuine, or is it merely another form of slavery? Are Sith Lords truly free, or are they simply bound by different chains? The chains of their own passions, their endless hunger for more power, their inability to ever be satisfied. The Jedi would argue that true freedom comes from liberation from desire, not its fulfillment. The Sith would counter that acceptance of limitation is not freedom, but surrender. This philosophical tension between Sith and Jedi concepts of freedom lies at the heart of their eternal conflict. Both claim to offer liberation. Both promise enlightenment. But they pursue these goals through diametrically opposed methods, and the galaxy has paid the price of their disagreement in blood across thousands of years of warfare. The Sith Code, from its opening declaration that peace is a lie through its closing promise of freedom through the Force, represents a complete philosophical system. It rejects conventional morality, embraces passion as fuel, transforms emotion into power, and promises ultimate liberation to those brave enough to follow its precepts to their conclusion. Understanding this code is essential to understanding the Sith, for it contains the condensed wisdom of millennia of dark side philosophy, the accumulated knowledge of countless dark lords who pursued freedom through power and found something that was either transcendence or damnation, depending on one's perspective. To be continued in Part 2. In the next section, we will explore how this philosophy manifested in the Rule of Two, examine the sacred role of betrayal in Sith succession, delve into the dark arts of alchemy and sorcery, and compare Sith philosophy directly with Jedi teachings. The journey into darkness continues. The Rule of Two, philosophy made doctrine. The transformation of Sith philosophy into practical doctrine reached its apex approximately 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, with the establishment of the Rule of Two. This decree, created by Darth Bane following the near extinction of the Sith Order, represented not merely a structural reorganization, but a philosophical refinement that would define the Sith for a millennium. The rule of two stated simply, there shall be only two Sith Lords at any given time, a master to embody the power of the dark side and an apprentice to crave it. Before Darth Bane's reformation, the Sith existed as they had for thousands of years. Numerous Dark Lords competing for dominance, entire academies training acolytes, armies of Sith warriors serving various masters. This multiplicity led to constant internal warfare. The Brotherhood of Darkness, the final iteration of the old Sith Order, tried to impose equality among Sith Lords. To prevent such conflicts, they forbade the use of the title Darth and claimed all Sith Lords were equal. But this attempt to suppress the natural Sith drive for dominance only created hidden conflicts and political maneuvering that weakened the Order as surely as open warfare. Darth Bane observed this self-destructive tendency and realized that it violated fundamental Sith philosophy. The principle that strength should lead to power meant that the strongest Sith should dominate. But when multiple powerful Sith existed simultaneously, the weaker ones would inevitably form alliances to overcome the stronger. Two apprentices of moderate strength could overwhelm a master of great strength. Three mediocre Sith Lords could conspire to eliminate one exceptional Dark Lord. This created a system where numbers mattered more than individual excellence, where political alliance counted for more than personal power, where the fittest did not survive, but the most numerous did. On the planet Lehun, within the Temple of the Ancients, Bane discovered a Sith holocron created by Darth Revan. This ancient Dark Lord had refused to train more than one apprentice at a time, recognizing that masters who trained multiple students were fools. Revan understood that apprentices would inevitably combine their lesser powers to overthrow a stronger master, creating a system where teaching too well became suicidal. Bane took Revan's personal practice and elevated it to absolute law. Limiting not just individual masters, but the entire Sith Order to a single pairing. The philosophical implications of the rule of two were profound. It represented a rejection of quantity in favor of quality, acknowledging that 10 mediocre Sith were worth less than one exceptional Dark Lord. More importantly, it aligned the structure of the Sith Order with core Sith philosophy. The Code taught that strength led to power, and power to victory. Under the rule of two, only the strongest Sith would survive, ensuring that each generation surpassed the previous one. Evolution through conflict, a principle embedded in Sith thinking, would now drive the development of the Sith Lords themselves. Rather than consuming them in internal warfare, the master-apprentice relationship under the rule of two embodied pure Sith philosophy. The master represented the culmination of generations of accumulated dark side knowledge, the current endpoint of Sith evolution. They held all the power that tradition, training, and experience could provide. The apprentice represented hunger, ambition, and potential. They craved the master's power and position, studying under them while constantly seeking opportunities to surpass them. This dynamic created a productive tension absent from other organizational structures. Unlike the Jedi, where masters genuinely sought their students' success and celebrated when Padawans exceeded them, Sith masters viewed their apprentices as both students and eventual replacements. This created a relationship of simultaneous cooperation and antagonism. The master needed to teach the apprentice enough to ensure Sith knowledge survived, but not so much that the apprentice could overthrow them before the master was ready to be replaced. The apprentice needed to learn everything possible while constantly hiding their growing strength until the moment came to strike. This relationship forced both parties to maintain peak performance. A master who grew complacent or weak invited assassination. An apprentice who revealed their plotting too early risked elimination before they were strong enough to succeed. The constant threat each posed to the other prevented either from resting on their achievements. Victory in the present was never final, because the apprentice's future challenge loomed inevitably. This perpetual tension aligned perfectly with Sith philosophy's rejection of peace and its celebration of conflict as a catalyst for growth. The rule of two also solved the problem of Sith secrecy. With thousands of Sith operating openly, as in the old Empire, remaining hidden from the Jedi was impossible. But two Sith, properly disciplined, could operate in complete secrecy. They could infiltrate Republic society, manipulate political systems, and prepare the groundwork for eventual Sith domination without revealing themselves. This approach traded immediate presence for long-term strategic advantage, demonstrating that true power required patience as much as passion. Over the 1,000 years between Darth Bane and Darth Sidious, the rule of two created a lineage of increasingly powerful Sith lords. Each master pushed their apprentice to the limit, and only an apprentice who had surpassed all previous Sith could successfully overcome their master. This meant that Darth Sidious, the final inheritor of Bane's lineage, was theoretically the most powerful Sith Lord who had ever lived. He was not merely powerful in his own right, but represented a millennium of accumulated knowledge, refined technique, and evolutionary pressure that had distilled Sith power to its ultimate expression. The philosophical principle underlying the rule of two, that limitation breeds strength, seems paradoxical for a philosophy based on breaking chains. But the Sith understood that strategic limitation could serve liberation. By limiting their numbers, they avoided the chains of internal conflict that had destroyed previous Sith orders. By limiting succession to those who proved superior, they avoided the chains of mediocrity and decline. The rule of two was itself a chain that, paradoxically, freed the Sith to achieve heights of power impossible under their previous organization. However, the rule of two contained inherent vulnerabilities that would eventually contribute to Sith destruction. Limiting the Sith to two individuals meant that killing both could exterminate the Order entirely. This nearly happened during the Battle of Endor, when both Darth Sidious and Darth Vader died. With no other Sith Lord to carry on the tradition, the lineage established by Darth Bane ended. The same consolidation of power that made individual Sith Lords terrifyingly effective made the Order as a whole fragile in a way the old numerous Sith Empire never was. The rule of two also created problems of interpretation and enforcement. Who determined what constituted a true Sith Lord rather than merely a dark side user? Darth Sidious trained multiple apprentices throughout his life: Darth Maul, Darth Tyrannus, Darth Vader, sometimes overlapping. Was this a violation of the rule of two or a pragmatic adaptation? Darth Vader trained secret apprentices of his own. The Inquisitors served the Empire's Sith Lords without being called Sith themselves. These gray areas suggested that the rule of two was more guideline than absolute law, adapted by powerful Sith to serve their purposes rather than strictly obeyed. The rule of two represented Sith philosophy in its most refined form. It embodied their belief in conflict as a tool for growth, their commitment to excellence over mediocrity, their understanding that true power required focus and discipline, and their willingness to embrace strategic limitation in service of ultimate liberation. For 1,000 years, this doctrine shaped Sith development, creating a lineage of Dark Lords, each more powerful than the last, culminating in a Sith Lord who successfully conquered the galaxy and nearly extinguished the Jedi forever. Betrayal as sacred doctrine. In Sith philosophy, betrayal was not merely acceptable, but sacred. The relationship between master and apprentice, the succession of power, the very structure of Sith society, demanded betrayal as a fundamental component. Where most civilizations viewed betrayal as the ultimate breach of trust, a moral failing that destroyed the fabric of social bonds, the Sith elevated it to a virtue. Understanding why requires understanding the Sith view of trust, loyalty, and the nature of power itself. The Sith believed that trust was a weakness, a vulnerability that enemies could exploit. A Sith Lord who trusted anyone, even their own apprentice, had failed to internalize core Sith teachings. Power belonged to those strong enough to seize and maintain it. If a Sith Lord could be betrayed and overthrown, they deserved to fall because they had grown too weak to defend their position. If an apprentice was not actively plotting to overthrow their master, they were failing in their duty to grow stronger and surpass the previous generation. This philosophy of betrayal flowed directly from the Sith Code. If passion should lead to strength, and strength to power, and power to victory, then an apprentice's passion to surpass their master was natural and proper. Their growing strength should inevitably challenge the master's power. Their victory over the master was the culmination of successful training. To expect loyalty from an apprentice was to expect them to betray their own nature and the principles of Sith philosophy itself. The practice of betrayal served several philosophical purposes beyond mere succession. It prevented complacency. A Sith Lord who knew their apprentice would eventually attempt betrayal could never rest easy. They had to maintain vigilance, constantly improve their skills, and stay alert to any sign of weakness in themselves or growing strength in their student. This paranoid vigilance kept Sith sharp in ways that secure authority never could. The Jedi could become complacent in their positions because their students were not plotting to kill them. The Sith never had that luxury. Betrayal also served as the ultimate test of an apprentice's readiness to become master. Words were meaningless. Demonstrations of power during training proved only that the apprentice had learned what the master taught. But successful plotting and executing the master's overthrow proved that the apprentice had truly surpassed their teacher. They had learned not just techniques, but timing, strategy, and the ruthlessness necessary to do what was required. A Sith who could not betray their master was not ready to be master themselves. Historical examples illustrate different approaches to this sacred betrayal. When Darth Sidious killed Darth Plagueis, he did so while his master slept, having intoxicated Plagueis during a celebration. Some might view this as dishonorable, but from a Sith perspective, it was perfect. Sidious had waited until he learned everything Plagueis could teach. He had positioned himself politically to not need his master's resources. He struck at the moment of maximum advantage with no possibility of failure. This was not cowardice, but supreme strategic thinking. Plagueis had taught his apprentice well, and Sidious honored that teaching by executing it flawlessly. In contrast, Darth Xana's betrayal of Darth Bane came through direct combat. When Bane had taught her all he could and began seeking ways to extend his own life at her expense, Xana challenged him openly. Their duel was both a test of her training and a philosophical statement. She honored Bane's teachings by facing him directly, demonstrating that she had the strength to claim power through victory in combat. Both approaches to betrayal were valid within Sith philosophy because both demonstrated that the apprentice had surpassed the master. The sacred nature of betrayal extended beyond the master-apprentice relationship. Alliances between Sith were always temporary arrangements of mutual benefit that should be betrayed the moment advantage shifted. Treaties with non-Sith were merely tools to be discarded when they had served their purpose. Even the concept of loyalty to the Sith Order itself was conditional. A Sith should betray the Order's interests if doing so served their personal path to power. The only unforgivable betrayal was betrayal of oneself, of one's own ambitions and potential. This philosophy created a culture where paranoia was wisdom and trust was suicide. Sith lords surrounded themselves with subordinates they knew were plotting against them, maintained alliances they knew were temporary, and trained apprentices they knew would eventually try to kill them. This might seem like a recipe for chaos and constant violence, but it actually created a harsh stability. Everyone knew the rules. Everyone understood the game. Betrayal was not a shock, but an expected move in an ongoing competition. The relationship between Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine illustrated the dysfunction that could arise when betrayal was expected but did not occur. Vader's injuries had diminished his raw power, making him less capable of overthrowing Palpatine than he might have been. Palpatine kept Vader in a state of pain and limitation, partly as punishment, but partly to prevent the betrayal that should have come. This stagnation violated Sith philosophy. Vader should have found a way to overcome his limitations and seize power. Palpatine should have replaced Vader with a more capable apprentice. Neither fully adhered to Sith principles, and their relationship became toxic in ways that traditional Sith dynamics were not supposed to allow. The philosophy of betrayal also explained Sith attitudes toward political and military alliances. The Sith Empire of old made treaties with various factions, manipulated governments, and forged temporary partnerships. But they never confused these arrangements with genuine alliance or loyalty. Every partnership contained the seeds of its own betrayal, and wise Sith prepared for the moment when betrayal would serve them better than cooperation. This made the Sith terrible allies, but effective manipulators, as they could participate fully in alliances while remaining ready to abandon or betray them at any moment. Some Sith Lords attempted to create systems that would survive their own betrayal. Darth Bane established the rule of two, knowing that every master would be betrayed by their apprentice, but designing the system so that betrayal served the Order's larger interests. Each betrayal was a graduation ceremony, a passing of knowledge to the next generation. The Master's death was not failure, but fulfillment of their purpose. They had created a Sith Lord superior to themselves, advancing the evolution of the Order. The sacred nature of betrayal in Sith philosophy represents perhaps their most alien characteristic. Most sentient beings value loyalty, trust, and reliability in their relationships. We build societies on the expectation that people will generally honor their commitments and not betray those who rely on them. The Sith rejected this foundational assumption, building their order on the opposite principle, that betrayal was inevitable, natural, and desirable. This made them terrifying, but also tragically isolated. A Sith Lord could never know true companionship, never experience unconditional trust, never rest secure in any relationship. They were perpetually alone, surrounded by enemies, even among those who served them. Yet, this isolation was, in the Sith view, the price of true strength and freedom. To depend on others' loyalty was to make oneself vulnerable to their betrayal. To need companionship was to create a weakness others could exploit. The perfect Sith Lord stood alone, needing nothing from others, except what could be taken by force, trusting no one except their own power. This was liberation through isolation, freedom through the acceptance that one could rely ultimately only on oneself. Sith alchemy and sorcery, dark knowledge preserved. Beyond the philosophy articulated in the Sith Code, the Order developed practical applications of the dark side that came to be known as Sith alchemy and sorcery. These arts represented the Sith approach to knowledge. Nothing was forbidden, no experiment too dangerous, no consequence too terrible if power could be gained. Where the Jedi rejected certain Force techniques as too corrupting or too dangerous, the Sith embraced them, pushing the boundaries of what the Force could accomplish and transforming themselves and their surroundings in the process. Sith alchemy referred to the use of the dark side to permanently alter living beings, objects, or even locations. Unlike temporary Force effects that ended when concentration ceased, alchemical changes were lasting, written into the fabric of reality itself. The native Sith species had practiced basic forms of alchemy before the arrival of the Dark Jedi exiles. But the exiles, with their sophisticated understanding of the Force, elevated these crude techniques into a sophisticated science that combined dark side manipulation with conventional knowledge of biology, chemistry, and physics. The creation of Sith swords exemplified alchemical craft. These weapons were forged from special alloys through conventional metalworking, but then infused with dark side energy through extensive rituals. The resulting blades could resist lightsabers, deflect blaster bolts, and some could serve as talismanic focuses for other dark side powers. The edge became supernaturally sharp, cutting through materials that should have been impossible to penetrate. More sinister, the blades retained dark side energy, corrupting those who wielded them if they lacked sufficient strength to master the weapon. These swords required tremendous time, expensive materials, and significant force energy to create. The very process of forging them drew the alchemist deeper into the dark side, as the techniques required meditations on hatred, anger, and domination. Each sword was unique, reflecting the creator's particular strengths and obsessions. Ludo Kresh created a blade of masterful workmanship that served as a talismanic focus for his political ambitions. Other Sith lords created weapons specialized for different purposes, some for pure destruction, others for subtle manipulation, still others for rituals that required a physical focus for dark side energies. Sith armor represented another application of alchemy. Dark Lords learned to enhance protective gear with the dark side, making it stronger and incorporating additional capabilities. The process often involved expensive materials, time-consuming rituals, and the infusion of the creator's own force essence into the armor. Features could include enhanced protection, strength augmentation, stealth capabilities, or even the ability to strike fear into enemies through a dark side aura. Darth Vader's imposing black armor, while also serving practical purposes for his damaged body, exemplified this tradition. The suit enhanced his physical abilities, protected him from various threats, contained advanced sensor equipment, and projected an aura of dark power that amplified his already formidable presence. The genetic manipulation of living beings represented the most disturbing application of Sith alchemy. Sith lords throughout history created monsters using the dark side to warp natural evolution and create creatures that served their purposes. Exar Kun, operating from Yavin 4, created terrifying beasts twisted by dark side influence, including battle hydras and Terrantechs, monsters specifically designed to hunt and kill Jedi. These creatures combined unnatural size and strength with an instinctive hatred of light side force users, making them effective weapons against the Sith's ancient enemies. The process of creating such monsters was grotesque. Sith alchemists would take existing creatures and subject them to prolonged exposure to dark side energy, while performing complex rituals that reshaped their very essence. The suffering of the original creatures was considered part of the process, their pain and terror fueling the dark side energies that transformed them. Many creatures did not survive the transformation, dying in agony, as their bodies rejected the changes being forced upon them. Those that survived were forever altered, their natural instincts warped by dark purpose. Perhaps most terrible were the Sith experiments with reanimating the dead. Through necromantic techniques that blurred the line between alchemy and sorcery, some Sith lords learned to wake corpses and bind them to service. These Korriban zombies and Sith undead served as guardians for tombs and temples, mindless soldiers that could not be killed because they were already dead. The techniques required to create them were complex and dangerous, demanding that the alchemists traffic with forces that even other Sith found disturbing. Yet the strategic value of tireless, fearless soldiers that required no sustenance kept necromancy alive as a Sith practice across millennia. Sith sorcery differed from alchemy in that it involved active manipulation of the Force through rituals, incantations, and focus objects, rather than permanent alteration of existing things. Where alchemy created lasting changes, sorcery produced immediate effects that required constant reinforcement. The original Sith species had practiced a form of magic that manipulated dark side energies through spells and gestures. The Dark Jedi exiles learned these techniques and combined them with their own Force knowledge to create something more potent than either tradition alone. The power of Sith sorcery lay in its versatility. A skilled sorcerer could accomplish effects impossible through conventional Force techniques. They could warp minds on a massive scale, affect environmental conditions, and manipulate probability itself through carefully constructed rituals. Unlike the relatively simple and direct applications of Force powers taught at Jedi academies, Sith sorcery involved complex preparations, specific ingredients, and lengthy ceremonies that built power over time before releasing it in devastating bursts. Waves of darkness represented one application of this sorcery. Through elaborate rituals, a Sith sorcerer could create actual visible waves of shadow, accompanied by thunderous sounds. Beings caught in these waves suffered intense despair and confusion, often fleeing in panic if exposed long enough. This technique could break enemy morale before battle was even joined, turning confident warriors into terrified refugees. The psychological impact extended beyond the moment of exposure, with some victims suffering lasting trauma that made them vulnerable to further manipulation. Battle meditation, while not exclusively a Sith technique, reached its most devastating applications in Sith hands. Through this power, a sufficiently strong Force user could influence the course of entire battles, enhancing their own forces while demoralizing enemies. Naga Sato used this technique during his invasion of Republic space, projecting illusions that multiplied his fleet's apparent size and coordinating attacks across multiple star systems simultaneously. The mental strain was enormous, but the strategic advantage justified the cost. A single Sith sorcerer using battle meditation could tip the balance of galactic war. The creation of Sith amulets demonstrated the practical fusion of alchemy and sorcery. These artifacts were crafted objects infused with dark side energy through both the permanent alteration of alchemy and the active spells of sorcery. Each amulet served a specific purpose: concentration, healing, shielding, ensnarement, understanding. They contained a measure of their creator's power, allowing that power to be used even after the creator's death. Sith lords would create such amulets to extend their influence beyond their own lifespan, ensuring their power affected the galaxy long after their physical bodies had perished. Perhaps the most ambitious applications of Sith sorcery involved attempts to manipulate life and death itself. The technique of essence transfer allowed a Sith Lord to move their consciousness into a new body, potentially achieving a form of immortality. This required not just power, but intricate knowledge of how consciousness related to the Force, how identity could be preserved through a transfer, and how a foreign spirit could be impressed upon unwilling flesh. The technique was dangerous in the extreme. Many who attempted it failed, their consciousness destroyed or trapped in the ethereal realm between life and death. Those who succeeded, like Darth Vader, achieved something approaching godhood, existence that extended across centuries, and the ability to possess new bodies when old ones failed. The ritual Darth Vader performed on Nathema represented perhaps the most terrible application of Sith sorcery in recorded history. By gathering hundreds of Sith lords and linking them in a massive dark side network, Vader drained the life essence from every living thing on the planet. Not just sentient beings, but every plant, every animal, every microorganism died in a single moment of unimaginable horror. The energy released granted Vitiate extraordinary power and virtual immortality. More disturbing, the ritual severed the planet's connection to the Force itself, creating a void where the Force had once flowed. The planet became a dead zone that Force sensitives instinctively avoided, helping to hide Vitiate's actions from potential discovery for millennia. The study of Sith alchemy and sorcery required dedication that bordered on obsession. The techniques were complex, dangerous, and often deadly to the practitioner. Ancient texts provided only partial knowledge, requiring extensive experimentation to complete. Many aspiring Sith alchemists and sorcerers destroyed themselves attempting techniques they did not fully understand. The successful ones combined exceptional Force sensitivity with rigorous discipline, extensive knowledge, and a willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone in pursuit of dark understanding. Darth Plagueis represented the pinnacle of Sith alchemical achievement. His experiments with manipulating midi-chlorians, the microscopic organisms that mediated connections to the Force, pushed the boundaries of what the dark side could accomplish. He claimed the ability to influence midi-chlorians to create life and prevent death, transcending the normal limitations of biological existence. Whether he truly achieved these heights or merely believed he had remains debated, but his research influenced Sith understanding of life's fundamental nature and inspired future Dark Lords to continue pushing boundaries others deemed inviolate. The knowledge of alchemy and sorcery was preserved through Sith holocrons, ancient texts, and oral traditions, passed from master to apprentice. Each generation of Sith built upon the discoveries of previous generations, refining techniques and developing new applications. The creation of Darth Sidious's book, The Creation of Monsters, compiled centuries of alchemical knowledge into a single tome, ensuring this dark wisdom would not be lost. The tome detailed the creation of shadow droids, chrysalis beasts, and other abominations born from Sith scientific inquiry unbounded by moral constraint. Yet for all their power, these arts carried costs beyond the obvious. Sith alchemy and sorcery demanded not just Force energy, but the practitioner's very essence. Each ritual, each alteration, each spell pulled the caster deeper into the dark side. The physical corruption visible in long-term dark side users was accelerated by regular practice of these arts. King Omen of Onderon achieved mastery over Sith sorcery, but at the cost of motor control over his own body. He could influence the hatred and malevolence of millions, but could not walk unaided. This trade-off, immense power for physical integrity, was one many Sith made willingly. The legacy of Sith alchemy and sorcery extends beyond specific techniques to a philosophical approach to knowledge itself. The Sith rejected the idea that any knowledge was too dangerous to pursue, or any experiment too immoral to attempt. They believed that power justified its own pursuit, that understanding required experimentation regardless of cost, and that the strong had the right to do whatever they could accomplish. This approach led to tremendous advances in dark side understanding, but also to horrors that stained galactic history and created wounds in the Force that persisted for millennia after their creators died. Holocrons and ancient teachings, preserving dark wisdom. The preservation of Sith knowledge across millennia of history required more than memory or written texts. The complexities of Force techniques, the nuances of dark side philosophy, and the personalities of great Sith lords needed to be captured in a format that could survive centuries and instruct future generations as effectively as living masters. For this purpose, the Sith developed holocrons, crystalline repositories that combine technology, the Force, and the captured essence of their creators. Sith holocrons were shaped as pyramids, in contrast to the cubic form of Jedi holocrons. This geometric difference symbolized their opposing philosophies. The Jedi's cube suggested balance and stability, while the Sith's pyramid embodied hierarchy and the path to a singular point of power. The devices were crafted from special crystalline materials through processes that combined conventional crafting with extensive Force manipulation. Only the most powerful Sith masters could create them, as the process required skills that took decades to develop and demanded resources few could command. The creation of a holocron began with gathering rare materials and preparing the crystalline lattice that would store information. But the crucial component was the capstone, a black crystal at the device's center that had to contain the creator's own cognitive essence. This was accomplished through the rite of commencement, an elaborate ritual so complex that only true Sith masters could perform it successfully. The ritual trapped a portion of the Sith Lord's consciousness within the crystal, creating a gatekeeper that could interact with future users. This gatekeeper was not merely a recording, but an interactive persona that retained the personality, knowledge, and often the prejudices of its creator. When a holocron was activated, the gatekeeper would appear as a hologram and converse with the user, teaching techniques and philosophy as a living master might. However, unlike living masters, gatekeepers could not learn from interactions or develop beyond the state they were in when the holocron was created. They were frozen moments of their creator's consciousness, preserved across the centuries. The information stored within holocrons was vast. A single device could contain an entire Sith Lord's accumulated knowledge, Force techniques they had mastered, philosophical insights they had developed, historical accounts of their era, and practical instructions for rituals and alchemy. The knowledge was organized in layers, with basic teachings accessible to any Force-sensitive who could open the device, while deeper secrets required demonstrated power or knowledge to unlock. This prevented unworthy students from accessing techniques they lacked the strength to wield safely. Unlike Jedi holocron gatekeepers, who often restricted access to advanced knowledge they deemed too dangerous for a particular student, Sith gatekeepers varied in their approach. Some allowed unlimited access to anyone strong enough to open their holocron, believing the dark side should flow unrestrained. Others imposed challenges or required mastery of prerequisite techniques before revealing their deepest secrets. The Creator's personality and philosophy determined the gatekeeper's behavior, making each holocron a unique experience reflecting its maker's approach to knowledge and power. Darth Revan's holocron, discovered by Darth Bane in the Temple of the Ancients on Lihan, contained the knowledge that would reshape Sith history. The device held Revan's teachings on dark side philosophy, ancient Sith rituals, and crucially, the technique for creating a thought bomb, a weapon that destroyed all Force-sensitive beings in its blast radius by trapping their souls in a vacuum. More importantly, the holocron emphasized Revan's belief that a master training multiple apprentices was a fool, as they would inevitably ally against their teacher. This insight inspired Bane to create the Rule of Two. Darth Andadu's holocron, known as the Holocron of Heresies, contained forbidden knowledge on Sith immortality and essence transfer. Andedu had been a necromancer of unusual ability who had kept his body animated through Sith sorcery even after it should have died. His holocron was notoriously difficult to access fully, as its gatekeeper judged seekers harshly and refused to teach those it deemed unworthy. The device's very name, Holocron of Heresies, suggested that even among the Sith who rejected most moral constraints, some of Andedu's practices were considered extreme. The holocrons created by Darth Sidious represented the culmination of millennia of Sith knowledge. As the final Dark Lord in Bane's lineage, Sidious had access to centuries of accumulated wisdom passed down through the Rule of Two. His holocrons stored not just his own considerable knowledge, but the distilled essence of every Sith Lord who had come before him. These devices contained techniques for manipulating the Senate, strategies for corrupting Jedi, methods for creating monsters through alchemy, and philosophical meditations on the nature of power itself. The accumulation of holocrons created repositories of dark knowledge that were simultaneously valuable and dangerous. The Jedi recognized this and actively sought out Sith holocrons to lock away in their archives on Coruscant. By the Clone Wars, most surviving Sith holocrons were in Jedi custody, secured in heavily restricted vaults where only senior Jedi masters could access them. The Jedi believed they were preventing dark knowledge from corrupting new generations. They did not realize that one of their senators had already been corrupted and was training in the dark arts under Darth Plagueis' tutelage. The loss of holocron creation knowledge represented a significant blow to Sith capability. By approximately 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the art of creating these devices had been largely lost. This meant that Sith knowledge from that period forward was less secure, more likely to be lost with each master's death. The rule of two partially compensated for this by ensuring knowledge passed directly from master to apprentice in an unbroken line. But the loss of holocrons as backup repositories made the Sith lineage more fragile. The few holocrons that survived and remained outside Jedi control became incredibly valuable. They represented links to the ancient Sith Empire when countless Dark Lords had walked the galaxy, and dark side knowledge had been accumulated across entire civilizations. A Sith apprentice who discovered an ancient holocron could gain knowledge their master did not possess, potentially providing the edge needed to achieve succession. This made holocron hunting a dangerous, but potentially rewarding pursuit for ambitious Sith. The philosophical knowledge preserved in holocrons extended beyond technique to fundamental questions about the Force's nature and the Sith's relationship to it. Ancient Sith Lords had grappled with questions of consciousness, identity, power, and transcendence. Their insights, preserved in holocrons, guided future generations in understanding not just how to wield the dark side, but why they did so, and what they hoped to achieve. The best holocrons did not merely teach skills, but would challenge their users to think deeply about their goals and methods. Some holocrons contained historical accounts that preserved knowledge of pivotal events in Sith history. The Great Hyperspace War, the internal conflicts that nearly destroyed various Sith orders, the successes and failures of different philosophical approaches. All of this was recorded by those who had witnessed it firsthand. These historical records served as both warning and inspiration, showing future Sith what had been attempted before and what outcomes those attempts had produced. The interactive nature of holocron gatekeepers created a unique educational experience. Unlike books or recordings that presented information in fixed form, gatekeepers could adapt their teaching to the student's level, answer questions specific to the student's circumstances, and engage in philosophical debates that helped students develop their own understanding. This made holocrons vastly superior to passive recordings as teaching tools, closer to having actual conversations with long-dead Sith masters. However, the gatekeeper's nature also created limitations. They could not learn or develop beyond their frozen state, meaning their knowledge became increasingly dated as centuries passed. A holocron created before the invention of hyperdrives could not teach about hyperspace navigation. A gatekeeper programmed during the old Sith Empire's height could not advise about conditions during the Clone Wars. Students had to recognize these limitations and not treat ancient knowledge as always applicable to modern circumstances. The loss of most Sith holocrons during the Jedi's various campaigns against the dark side represented one of the greatest tragedies in Sith history. From their own perspective, entire lineages of knowledge, experiments that had taken centuries to complete, philosophical insights developed by the greatest minds ever to embrace the dark side. All of this was locked away in Jedi vaults or destroyed entirely. What remained was a fraction of what had once existed, making the Sith's task of rebuilding their power that much more difficult. Yet, some knowledge proved impossible to destroy entirely, as long as even one holocron survived. as long as ancient texts remained hidden in forgotten tombs, as long as oral traditions passed from master to apprentice, Sith wisdom endured. The philosophy and techniques preserved in these repositories ensured that the Sith would return again and again across the millennia, learning from the past while adapting to present circumstances, carrying forward a tradition of dark knowledge that stretched back thousands of years. The Sith versus Jedi, contrasting philosophies. Understanding Sith philosophy requires understanding what they rejected, and what they rejected was the Jedi way. These two orders represented opposing approaches to the Force, to morality, to the individual's place in the galaxy. Their conflict was not merely political or territorial, but philosophical, a disagreement about the fundamental nature of existence and how one should live within it. Examining these contrasts illuminates why the Sith believed their path was superior and why the Jedi saw the dark side as corruption rather than liberation. The most fundamental difference lay in their relationship with emotions. The Jedi Code taught, "There is no emotion, there is peace." This did not mean Jedi felt nothing, but that they trained to acknowledge emotions without being controlled by them. Fear, anger, hatred, these were recognized but not acted upon. The goal was emotional serenity that allowed clear thinking and connection to the Force without the distortions passion could create. The Sith Code countered with, "There is only passion," embracing emotions as sources of strength rather than obstacles to overcome. This difference shaped everything else about the two orders. A Jedi confronting a terrible injustice would feel anger, but would train themselves to act from principle rather than emotion. They would seek to correct the wrong through the minimum force necessary, preserving life where possible, showing mercy when appropriate. A Sith confronting the same situation would channel their anger into devastating action, destroying the perpetrators without hesitation or mercy, viewing anger not as a weakness to overcome, but as righteous fuel for justice. The Jedi's emphasis on emotional control created what they saw as wisdom and what the Sith saw as paralysis. By the time a Jedi had calmed their emotions and considered all angles of a situation, opportunities for action might have passed. The Sith believed that moments requiring action demanded an immediate response fueled by passion. Hesitation was weakness. Overthinking led to inaction. Better to strike decisively, even if imperfectly, than to deliberate until the moment had passed. Yet, the Jedi would counter that passion-driven decisions often created consequences worse than the original problem. Anger might fuel devastating action, but was that action wise? Fear might sharpen the senses, but did it lead to good judgment? The Jedi believed that calm wisdom produced better outcomes over time than passionate impulsiveness, even if individual moments seemed to favor quick action. They saw the Sith's embrace of emotion as trading long-term wisdom for short-term power. The two orders' different approaches to attachment illustrated their fundamental disagreement. Jedi were forbidden from forming attachments, romantic relationships, family bonds, even excessive loyalty to specific individuals over the collective order. The reasoning was that attachments created biases, made Jedi act in their own interest rather than the greater good, and opened them to manipulation through threats to those they loved. Anakin Skywalker's fall demonstrated the Jedi's concerns about attachment were not unfounded. The Sith embraced attachments, but in possessive, consuming ways. A Sith's love was not generous, but grasping. They did not love in the sense of wanting the beloved's happiness, but in the sense of needing to possess and control. This possessive attachment became another source of passion, another fuel for power. When Anakin became Darth Vader, his attachment to Padme did not disappear, but twisted into something darker, fueling his hatred of himself and those he blamed for her death. The Order's attitudes toward self differed dramatically. The Jedi Code emphasized selflessness, teaching that a Jedi should not act from personal desire, but from duty to the Force and the greater good. Individual identity was less important than one's role as a Jedi. The final line of the Jedi Code, "There is no death, there is the Force," suggested that individual existence should dissolve back into the cosmic energy from which it came. Personal ambition, individual glory, the pursuit of personal power, all of these were antithetical to Jedi philosophy. The Sith Code celebrated the self. "Through victory, my chains are broken, and the Force shall free me," both used first-person singular, emphasizing individual liberation. A Sith's identity, ambitions, and desires were not obstacles to overcome, but the very foundation of their power. To surrender the self to any higher authority, including the Force itself, was the ultimate slavery. True freedom meant perfect expression of individual will without constraint or limitation. This difference appeared clearly in how the two orders structured themselves. The Jedi Order was hierarchical, but ultimately communal. Knowledge was shared. Students were taught in groups. Decisions were made collectively by the Jedi Council. Individual Jedi were expected to subordinate personal judgment to collective wisdom. The Order's strength came from cooperation, shared knowledge, and unified purpose. A single Jedi was strong, but thousands working together were powerful enough to maintain peace across the galaxy for millennia. The Sith structure, especially under the rule of two, was intensely individual. Each Sith Lord stood alone, relying on no one, trusting no one, sharing knowledge only when necessary for the apprentice's training. Cooperation between Sith was always temporary and conditional. The Order's strength came from concentrating power in exceptional individuals rather than distributing it across many. A single Sith Lord properly trained and fully committed to the dark side could equal or exceed many Jedi in immediate power, even if the Jedi outnumbered them. The Order's different goals for the galaxy reflected their opposing philosophies. The Jedi sought peace, stability, and balance. They saw themselves as guardians, maintaining conditions that allowed civilizations to flourish without falling into chaos or tyranny. They intervened in conflicts to restore peace, negotiated settlements, and generally tried to minimize violence and disruption. Their ideal galaxy was one where the Force flowed freely, where light and dark were balanced, where most beings lives free from the turmoil of constant conflict. The Sith saw this Jedi vision as stagnation. True growth required conflict. Civilizations advanced through struggle. The strongest individuals emerged through competition. Peace was not harmony, but complacency, a temporary absence of the conflict that should naturally exist. The Sith did not necessarily seek war for its own sake, but they believed that a galaxy shaped by strength, selecting the worthy, was superior to one maintained in artificial peace by Jedi interference. Both orders claimed to understand the Force's true nature, but they described it differently. The Jedi saw the Force as an energy field connecting all living things, something to harmonize with and serve. They believed the Force had a will that could be perceived through meditation and followed through right action. A Jedi was meant to be the Force's instrument, a channel through which it acted in the world. This required submission of personal will to the Force's will. The Sith saw the Force as a tool to be wielded by those strong enough to claim it. They believed the Force had no will beyond what those who commanded it imposed upon it. The dark side was not corruption, but the Force experienced through passion and power, rather than serenity and submission. A Sith was meant to master the Force, to bend it to their purpose, to use it to achieve their goals, regardless of any supposed cosmic will. This required absolute confidence in personal will over any external authority. The two philosophies' approaches to conflict resolution differed fundamentally. Jedi sought peaceful solutions, negotiation, and compromise. They believed most conflicts arose from misunderstanding or competing legitimate interests that could be reconciled through dialogue. Violence was a last resort, used only when all other options had failed. Even in war, Jedi tried to end conflicts as quickly as possible with minimum casualties and sought reconciliation afterward. Sith saw conflict as natural and often desirable. Disputes were resolved through demonstrations of power, with the strong prevailing over the weak as they should. Negotiation was manipulation, compromise was weakness, and reconciliation was merely the temporary cessation of hostilities until one party grew strong enough to resume the conflict. The goal was not to end conflict, but to win it decisively, establishing dominance so absolute that resistance became futile. Both orders produced beings of tremendous power and capability, but they created different types of individuals. A fully trained Jedi Knight was wise, disciplined, capable of extraordinary feats through the Force, and dedicated to serving the greater good. They could fight when necessary, but preferred peaceful solutions. They were powerful, but not power-hungry, capable, but not ambitious, strong, but not domineering. A fully realized Sith Lord was ruthless, powerful, driven by passion and ambition, capable of terrible acts without guilt or hesitation. They pursued power for its own sake, viewing strength as self-justifying and weakness as worthy of destruction. They were freed from moral constraints, but enslaved to their own desires, liberated from external authority, but bound by internal compulsions they could not or would not resist. The tragic irony was that both orders sought freedom, and both created forms of bondage. The Jedi sought freedom from the tyranny of passion and achieved wisdom, but risked passivity and disconnection from aspects of existence that gave life meaning. The Sith sought freedom from all limitation and achieved terrible power, but created beings who could never know peace, trust, or contentment. The galaxy's greatest philosophical conflict came down to competing visions of liberty, freedom from or freedom to, and both visions contained their own forms of truth and their own tragic limitations. Legacy and modern interpretations. The influence of Sith philosophy extends far beyond the historical Sith lords who practiced it, even after the apparent extinction of the Sith with the deaths of Darth Sidious and Darth Vader. Their ideas continued to resonate across the galaxy. Dark side users who were not technically Sith drew upon Sith teachings. Force-sensitive individuals discovered the ancient Sith artifacts and were corrupted by them. The very locations where Sith lords had worked their terrible experiments remained saturated with dark side energy for millennia, influencing anyone who came near them. The Supreme Leader Snoke, the First Order's mysterious leader, exemplified how Sith influence could persist without actual Sith lords. Created as a puppet by a somehow surviving Palpatine, Snoke wielded dark side powers and commanded through fear and domination in the Sith tradition. He trained Ben Solo in dark side techniques, turning the grandson of Darth Vader into Kylo Ren, a dark warrior who revered his grandfather's legacy. Though neither Snoke nor Kylo Ren were technically Sith, both drew heavily on Sith philosophy and practices. The Knights of Ren represented another manifestation of Sith legacy. This order of dark side users followed a brutal code that prized strength and despised weakness. While not bound by Sith doctrine or trained in Sith techniques, their philosophy of might making right and their embrace of passion over serenity clearly reflected Sith influence. They demonstrated that even without formal training, the core Sith ideas of power through strength and freedom through dominance could emerge independently from similar premises. Individual Force users throughout the galaxy continued to discover Sith holocrons and ancient texts, becoming corrupted by the knowledge they found. These dark side adepts were not organized into any formal order and had no claim to the Sith lineage, but they practiced techniques developed by ancient Sith lords and applied Sith philosophy to their own circumstances. Each discovery of a Sith artifact was a potential seed from which dark side influence could grow, spreading Sith ideas even when no Sith existed to teach them. The physical locations associated with Sith history retained power long after their creators died. Korriban, renamed Moraband, remained a dead world saturated with dark side energy. Its tombs still contained the spirits of ancient Sith lords, or at least impressions so strong they seemed alive. When Yoda traveled there seeking knowledge, he encountered what appeared to be Darth Bane himself. Though whether this was truly the ancient Sith Lord's spirit or merely a manifestation of Korriban's dark power remained unclear. Malachor, site of an ancient battle and home to a Sith temple containing a superweapon, remained dangerous thousands of years after its creation. When Ezra Bridger and his companions explored the temple during the Age of the Empire, they found it still operational, still powerful, still corrupting. The dark side presence was so strong that even Jedi could be temporarily turned through exposure to it. The temple's very architecture seemed designed to draw visitors deeper into darkness, to seduce them with promises of power. Modern scholars of both light and dark sought to understand Sith philosophy not merely as evil to be opposed, but as a complete worldview that had shaped galactic history. Some recognized that despite the terrible acts committed in the dark side's name, the Sith had raised important questions about the nature of freedom, the role of passion in life, and whether the Jedi's restrictions truly led to wisdom or merely to a different form of limitation. These scholars did not embrace the Sith path, but acknowledged that it contained insights worth understanding. The debate about balance in the Force took on new dimensions when examined through the lens of Sith philosophy. The Jedi had long believed that balance meant the dominance of the light over the dark, that a balanced Force was one where the dark side's corruption had been eliminated, but some, including the Bendu encountered by Kanan and Ezra, suggested that true balance required both light and dark, that attempting to eliminate one side was itself a form of imbalance. If this view was correct, the Sith's existence might not be aberration, but necessity. The prophecy of the Chosen One who would bring balance to the Force created particular confusion. If Anakin Skywalker was indeed the Chosen One, did his temporary service to the dark side as Darth Vader represent failure or necessary part of his journey toward bringing balance? When he killed Darth Sidious and died himself, were both Sith and Jedi largely eliminated, leaving the Force more balanced than it had been in millennia? Different scholars interpreted the prophecy differently, but all acknowledged that understanding what had happened required understanding Sith philosophy and why the dark side had proven so persistent. Modern Force users face the challenge of learning from the past without repeating its mistakes. Luke Skywalker, after the fall of his Jedi Academy, spent years studying the ancient Jedi texts and examining what had gone wrong. He came to question some traditional Jedi teachings, recognizing that their rigid approach to training and their absolute rejection of attachment had contributed to tragedies like his father's fall. Yet, he also saw clearly that the Sith path led to destruction. The question became whether a middle way was possible. Rey's journey illustrated the ongoing relevance of these philosophical questions. Granddaughter of Darth Sidious himself, she carried the legacy of the dark side in her very blood, yet she chose the light, declaring herself a Jedi despite having no formal training in that tradition. Her struggle with the darkness her temptation by the promise of easy power, her ultimate choice to reject the Sith path in favor of something better. All of this demonstrated that the conflict between the Sith and Jedi philosophies remained relevant even in an era when neither order formally existed. The Sith's greatest legacy might be the questions they forced the galaxy to confront about power, freedom, and the nature of right action. By rejecting conventional morality and embracing passion without restraint, they demonstrated what happened when individuals pursued power without limitation. The horrific results, genocide, slavery, totalitarian empire, seemed to validate the Jedi warnings about the dark side. Yet the Jedi themselves had failed to prevent the Sith's rise, suggesting their philosophy was also incomplete. Modern Force philosophy increasingly attempted to synthesize insights from both traditions while rejecting their extremes. the recognition that emotions were natural and could be acknowledged without being acted upon destructively, borrowed from both Jedi discipline and Sith honesty about passion's role. The emphasis on personal responsibility rather than blind obedience to any code reflected Sith individualism without their rejection of all moral constraint. The goal of using power to help rather than dominate drew on Jedi service while rejecting their sometimes excessive passivity. The ultimate question Sith philosophy posed for the galaxy was whether freedom and power could be pursued without becoming enslaved to that pursuit. The Sith promised liberation through strength, but created beings who could never rest, never be satisfied, never know peace. They broke external chains only to forge internal ones. Their path to freedom led to a different form of bondage, one arguably worse because it was chosen and celebrated rather than imposed and resisted. Yet, dismissing Sith philosophy entirely as simply evil missed important truths it contained. Passion did provide strength, power did enable victory, conflict did drive evolution. The Sith were not wrong about everything, which made them more dangerous than simple villains would have been. Their philosophy contained enough truth to be seductive, enough validity to attract followers, enough real insight to persist for millennia despite countless defeats. Conclusion. Understanding the darkness. We have journeyed deep into the heart of Sith philosophy, examining its code, its practices, its conflicts with the Jedi, and its lasting impact on galactic civilization. What we have seen is not simple evil, but a complex worldview built on premises that many found compelling. The Sith offered freedom from limitation, power without restraint, and the promise that individual will could triumph over any obstacle. They rejected the chains of morality, tradition, and cosmic authority in favor of self-determination carried to its ultimate extreme. The tragedy of the Sith was that their path to freedom created its own forms of enslavement. In seeking liberation from all external authority, they became slaves to their own passions. In pursuing power without limit, they created needs that could never be satisfied. In breaking every chain, they forged new ones from their own desires. The ultimate irony of Sith philosophy was that it promised freedom, but delivered bondage of a different, perhaps more terrible kind. Yet, understanding the Sith requires more than judging them. It requires recognizing the questions they posed about existence, power, freedom, and the individual's relationship to cosmic forces. Their answers to these questions were often terrible, their methods frequently horrific, their legacy soaked in blood. But the questions themselves remain valid. How should one balance passion and discipline? When does tradition become restriction? What is the relationship between power and right? These questions transcend the Sith and remain relevant to anyone contemplating the nature of existence and how to live within it. The dark side of the Force, embodied in Sith philosophy, represents an ever-present temptation. The promise of easy power, of freedom from constraint, of liberation from weakness. These appeals never disappear because they speak to fundamental desires. The Sith endured for millennia, not because they were invulnerable, but because their philosophy addressed needs and desires that every generation rediscovered. Understanding their appeal is the first step in resisting it, recognizing that true freedom requires discipline, that real power comes from serving something greater than oneself, and that the chains broken through darkness are replaced by chains forged from the darkness itself. As you drift towards sleep, consider the Dark Lords who walked the paths of power throughout galactic history. Consider their terrible achievements and their ultimate failures. Consider what they sought and what they found. The Sith believed that the Force would free them. They broke every chain in pursuit of that liberation. And in the end, they discovered that the greatest prison is one we build for ourselves from our own unlimited desires. If you enjoyed this deep exploration of Sith philosophy, please like and subscribe to Sith Lore for more explorations of the dark side's history, teachings, and impact on the Star Wars galaxy. May your dreams be filled with the wisdom of the ancient Dark Lords, and may you wake with deeper understanding of the philosophy that shaped civilizations and nearly conquered the galaxy itself. Until next time, may the Force be with you, all of it light and dark, for only in understanding both can we truly comprehend its nature.